At a crowded airport, a 39-year-old black mechanic was minutes away from the flight that could change his family's future, until he stopped to defend an elderly woman being harassed. He missed the flight, lost the interview, and for a moment it felt like his one chance slipped away. What he didn't know was that the woman he protected was one of the most powerful figures in aviation, and she was about to repay his kindness in a way he never saw coming. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to hype and subscribe for more heartwarming stories every day. The Arizona sun was barely up when Darius Coleman pulled his old pickup into the overnight parking structure at Phoenix Sky Harbor, the engine coughing like it was begging for retirement. Darius shut the door carefully, the way a man does when he knows every sound his truck makes could be its last. He slung his workman's backpack over one shoulder and checked the time on his cracked phone screen. 6:48 a.m. His flight left at 7:25. 27 minutes. Enough to make it. Barely. He took a breath, the kind of breath that holds years inside it. Years of 12-hour shifts at a failing garage. Years of telling his daughter Maya that things would get better. Years of balancing bills like they were explosives. Today wasn't just a flight. It was the first real shot in a decade. Silver Hawk Automotive, senior technical specialist, salary that didn't make him wince, insurance his mother desperately needed, a schedule where he could show up to Maya's school play instead of apologizing afterward. It wasn't glamorous, but it was oxygen. He started walking fast toward the terminal, boots thudding against concrete as the desert morning heat began rising in waves around him. He kept replaying that phone call from last week. Final interview, Mr. Coleman. The director is only available Monday in person. Don't be late. He'd been early to everything since that moment. Until today, when Maya's asthma cough spiked at 5 a.m., and he ended up sitting with her, rubbing her back, waiting for her breathing to ease. He couldn't leave her struggling. Not after losing her mother. Not after promising he'd always stay. Now, with his heart pushing hard and his legs moving faster than they usually did, he rushed past families juggling strollers, business travelers rolling sleek suitcases, and tourists already wearing Grand Canyon merch. The airport buzzed with that mix of hope and hurry only early flights can produce. For a moment, Darius felt like he belonged in that fast, forward-moving crowd. After all, he was finally going somewhere that mattered. But even as he sped up, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered the hard truth. There was no backup plan. This trip wasn't something he could reschedule with a credit card he didn't have. This wasn't a company that would bend their rules. And he knew better than anyone that opportunities didn't wait for men like him. Still, he kept moving. Faster. He thought about his mother, Henrietta, her stubborn smile hiding the pain in her legs as she shuffled around the kitchen every morning. He thought about Maya, her oversized glasses and her soft voice when she'd handed him a little drawing the night before, two stick figures, one big, one small, both standing next to an airplane. "For your big day, Daddy," she'd said. He folded that drawing into his wallet like it was a contract he couldn't break. As he approached the sliding glass doors of Terminal 4, he wiped the sweat from his brow and muttered to himself, "Come on, Darius, not today, not today." The doors opened with a rush of cool air, washing over his face like a blessing. Inside, the terminal was alive, announcements echoing, wheels rolling, voices blending into a constant hum of movement. Darius scanned for the security checkpoint, doing mental math, deciding which line looked shortest, which traveler ahead of him looked likely to unpack half their house during screening. He angled toward the far left lane, spotting a group of military personnel moving through quickly. For the first time that morning, he felt a flicker of confidence. He'd make it. He just had to keep going. Momentum was the only thing he could control right now. But right as that thought settled in his chest, right as he tightened his grip on the handle of his backpack and leaned forward into his stride, something on his right side made him turn his head. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle enough that most people passed without even noticing. But Darius noticed, a break in the rhythm of the terminal, a tremor in the air, a sound that didn't belong in the smooth, efficient flow of travelers. And in that single second, even before he fully understood what he'd seen, something in his gut shifted. Something was wrong. And the morning his entire future was about to change because of it. Darius slowed for half a second, his eyes sharpening the way they always did when something felt off. Near the sliding doors where passengers were getting dropped off, an elderly woman stood with her purse pressed tight against her chest, her shoulders curled inward like she was trying to make herself smaller. Two men flanked her, clean clothes, tidy haircuts, the kind of appearance that made you second-guess your instincts. But their posture gave them away. One leaned too close, the other blocked her exit, and the woman, she wasn't arguing, she was freezing. That kind of stillness didn't come from guilt, it came from fear. Darius took in the scene in a single sweep, the taller man jabbing a finger toward a tiny scrape on his forearm, the other waving a phone in the woman's face like he was recording her. He heard fragments. "You bumped me, this is assault, we can call the police, unless you want to settle this right now." A classic airport scam, polished, quiet, fast, the kind most travelers never realized was happening. But the thing that hit Darius hardest wasn't the scam itself, it was the woman's hands. They trembled in the same desperate, defeated way. His mother's hands had trembled the day someone tried to pressure her into signing a fake home maintenance contract. That memory snapped into him like a live wire. 21 minutes until boarding. He could still make it if he kept walking. But his legs didn't move. One of the men shifted, planting a palm on the handle of the woman's suitcase, as if to keep her from leaving. She whispered something soft, apologetic, the sound of someone trying to placate danger. The taller man stepped closer, and his shadow swallowed half her body. That was it. Darius's feet changed direction before he consciously told them to. He didn't charge in. He didn't shout. He just walked with a steady, unwavering pace that said he wasn't looking for trouble, but he damn sure wasn't afraid of it either. "Ma'am," he said, voice calm but firm as he approached, "are you all right here?" The shorter scammer turned first, eyes flicking over Darius like he was sizing up a problem he hadn't expected. The taller one straightened his shoulders, putting on that fake confidence scam artists wear like a badge. "This doesn't concern you, man. She hit me with her bag, we're handling it." The woman shook her head weakly. I just." Darius stepped between them, not aggressively, just enough to give her space. "Ma'am," he said again, keeping his eyes on her, "do you need help?" Her answer wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was enough. "Yes." The taller scammer scoffed. "Look, hero, we don't want any problems. She owes us for damages, that's all." Darius didn't take the bait. "Hey," he said, still calm, "there are cameras all over this place. If something happened, security can sort it out." That single sentence cracked the scammer's confidence. The shorter one shifted his weight. The taller one forced a laugh that didn't sound like a laugh at all. "We don't have time for that, we're being reasonable." "Great," Darius replied. "Then you won't mind sticking around for 5 minutes. He reached for his phone to call security, but before he could dial, the taller scammer made a mistake. He grabbed the woman's arm, not in a violent way, but firm enough that she flinched and sucked in a breath. Everything in Darius lit up at once. He stepped forward, loosening the man's grip with one clean, practiced motion, gentle enough not to escalate, firm enough to make a point. "Don't touch her." The scammer jerked his hand back and glanced around, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. A couple nearby travelers had stopped. A luggage cart rattled to a halt. The energy had shifted. Scammers thrived in silence. Attention killed the game. The shorter one muttered, "Forget this," and tugged the other's sleeve. They backed away quickly, disappearing into the stream of arriving passengers before airport security even arrived. The woman exhaled shakily, like she'd been holding her breath for minutes. Darius turned to her, softening his tone. "You okay, ma'am?" She nodded, though her eyes were glassy and her voice unsteady. "Thank you. I don't know what would've." Before she could finish, a security officer hurried over, having been flagged down by a witness. He asked for details, then standard procedure kicked in. "Sir, your name for the report." Darius gave it, first and last, spelled it, even his phone number, because that's how these reports worked. The officer turned to the woman. "Ma'am, are you traveling alone?" She nodded again, still pale. "Do you need medical assistance?" "No," she whispered. Just a moment." The officer offered to escort her inside. She declined, insisting she was all right, but her body said otherwise. When she tried to lift her suitcase, the tremble in her hands returned. This was the crossroads. Darius knew it. The terminal entrance was only a few steps away. He could walk through it, sprint to security, pray for a short line, hope for a miracle. He could salvage this morning, maybe salvage his shot at Silver Hawk. But he looked at the woman, really looked, and saw how she was trying to hold herself together with nothing but pride and thin air. And something inside him closed the door on his own urgency. He'd been raised to never walk past someone hurting, even when it cost him. "Let me help you get inside," he said quietly. She blinked at him, surprised by the offer. "I don't want to make you late." "It's all right," he said with a small smile that he hoped hid the knot in his stomach. "Come on, let's get you checked in." And right there, without fanfare or music swelling in the background, Darius stepped away from his flight, and toward the choice that would change everything. The security officer walked off after finishing the report, and the moment he did, the woman's shoulders sagged as if the last thread holding her upright had snapped. She took a step toward the terminal doors, but her knees wobbled, her hand catching the metal railing for balance. Darius reacted instantly, steadying her arm before she could fall again. Up close, he could hear the thin strain in her breathing, not panic anymore, more like exhaustion layered under fear. "You sure you're all right?" he asked softly. She nodded, but it was the kind of nod people give when they're trying not to be a burden. Her voice trembled on the edges. "I'm fine, just a little shaken." A little shaken was an understatement. Her fingers trembled as she tried to adjust the strap of her purse, and when she bent to lift her suitcase, she couldn't even get the handle off the ground. Darius didn't let her try a second time. "I got that," he said, pulling the suitcase handle upright with one hand and picking up her smaller bag with the other. She struggled to protest, but he cut her off with the same steady calm he used whenever his mother insisted she didn't need help walking down the stairs. "Let me carry these. You focus on breathing." She exhaled a shaky laugh, the kind you hear from someone trying to pull themselves together. "Thank you. I'm not usually this flustered." "It was a lot," Darius replied. "Anybody would be shaken." They moved slowly into the terminal, not because he wanted to waste time, but because he could feel how deliberate her movements were. Every step looked measured, as if she was afraid her legs wouldn't listen to her if she rushed. He kept an easy pace beside her, scanning for a nearby bench, but the woman shook her head almost immediately, as though she sensed his intention. "Please, I just need to get through security. Once I'm past that, I'll be fine." Fine wasn't the word he'd use, but she was trying so hard to keep her dignity intact that he didn't challenge it. "All right," he said, shifting her bags in his grip. "Which airline?" "Gate 52C, she answered quietly, holding out her crumpled boarding pass. Darius looked at the gate number, and did an instinctive calculation. That was a long walk, a long slow walk. His chest tightened, he could feel the seconds slipping like sand through his hands, but he didn't stop. He took her into the security line, choosing the quietest one, not the shortest, but the one where she wouldn't get rushed or pushed. People behind them barely noticed anything, too absorbed in their own flights, their own timelines. Darius didn't say a word about the clock ticking inside his chest. He didn't sigh, didn't check his phone, didn't tap his foot. He kept his attention on her, on the way her breathing steadied a little more each minute. When they reached the conveyor belt, she hesitated again, that tremble returning in her hands, as she tried to lift her purse onto the tray. Darius set all her items on the belt, with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd done physical labor his whole life. "You go ahead," he said, nodding toward the metal detector. "I'll grab everything on the other side." She walked through carefully, raising her arms slowly, wincing like her shoulders still remembered the scammer's grip. When she stepped out, she looked back at him with a mix of apology and gratitude, an expression he knew too well because he'd seen it on people who weren't used to being helped. On the other side, he gathered her bags as the bins came out one by one. A TSA agent gave them a brief glance, probably checking if she needed assistance, but when she saw Darius handling everything confidently, she looked away. There was something grounding about the way Darius moved, steady, sure, unbothered by weight. He'd always been that way. Carrying more than his share was as natural to him as breathing. Once everything was packed again, the woman took a slow sip from the water bottle he'd given her earlier, clearing her throat. "I'm sorry for slowing you down," she murmured. "You're not slowing me down," Darius replied gently. He didn't say the rest, that even if she was, it didn't matter. they began the long walk toward Gate 52C. The morning rush of the airport buzzed around them, kids laughing loudly, rolling suitcases rattling over tile, gate announcements cutting through the air, but their pace remained steady and quiet. Every few minutes, Darius checked if she needed to stop, but she always shook her head, determined to keep moving. He matched her step for step. About halfway there, her pace faltered again. She reached for a nearby wall, steadying herself. "I'm sorry," she whispered, closing her eyes for a moment. "I didn't eat this morning. Foolish of me." Without hesitation, Darius guided her toward the nearest cafe kiosk. "Sit," he said, lowering her gently onto a bench. "I'll get something." "You don't have to." "I do," he said simply. He bought her a small tea, a muffin, and a protein bar. Nothing fancy, just enough to get her strength up. Those were the last dollars he had in his wallet, but he didn't even pause to think about it. When he handed her the food, she looked at him like she was seeing more than just a kind stranger, like she was studying the way he moved, the way he talked, the way he kept choosing to help even when he had reasons not to. "What brings you to the airport today?" she asked quietly, almost as if she was afraid of the answer. Darius tried to play it down. "Job interview," he said, shrugging. "Big one." Her eyes drifted to the nearest overhead screen. The flight to Seattle was flashing in bright orange. "Final boarding." "That's yours," she whispered. He looked up at it, then looked down at his hands. His jaw clenched for a moment, but he didn't let the emotion show on his face. "Yeah," he said softly. "Was?" She stared at him, horrified. "You missed it because of me." Darius shook his head immediately. "No, I stayed because you needed help. That's the right call, always is." He didn't explain how much this interview meant. He didn't explain how tight his life had become. He didn't explain the pressure he'd felt in his chest all morning. He carried those things quietly, the way he carried everything else. She watched him for a long moment, really looking at him. "Thank you," she said finally, voice low but full. He stood up, lifting her bags again. "Come on, ma'am, let's get you to that gate." And together, they started walking again. Him a step behind her, her leaning just slightly toward him like his presence made the world steadier. Neither of them knew it yet, but this slow walk through the terminal was the beginning of something that would rewrite both their lives. By the time Darius walked the woman the final stretch to Gate 52C, the last passengers were already stepping onto the jet bridge. Her flight number blinked across the screen in bold red letters, "Final call." She straightened slightly, as if the adrenaline of nearly missing her own flight pushed her back onto her feet. "Thank you," she said again, her voice steadier now. "I can take it from here." Darius nodded, lifting her carry-on gently to her side. She touched his arm in a brief, trembling gesture, not dramatic, not emotional, just human. Then she stepped into the boarding line, handing her pass to the agent. As she disappeared down the jet bridge, the airport suddenly felt louder, colder, bigger, like her presence had been a buffer he didn't know he needed. The moment she was gone, the adrenaline drained out of him all at once. He turned, exhaling through his nose as if bracing himself before even seeing the overhead board. But when he looked up, he still wasn't ready for the punch in the gut that hit him. "See, Flight 741, gate closed." He froze, not angry, not surprised, just still. The way a person gets when reality lands so cleanly there's not even room to argue with it. He walked to an empty row of seats near a window, dropped his backpack onto the chair beside him, and finally allowed his shoulders to collapse for the first time that morning. His heart wasn't racing anymore, it was the opposite, a slow, heavy beat that felt like it was echoing in his ribs. He fished his phone out of his pocket, 1% battery, the screen flickering like it was struggling to stay alive. He tried to pull up the airline app, but the phone shut off before it even loaded. Just a black screen staring back at him. He reached instinctively into his wallet for a charger cord, but stopped when he remembered he'd given Maya his only portable battery pack the night before because her iPad kept dying during homework. "Daddy, it's fine," she told him. "You can use it tomorrow." She always said tomorrow, like he had a guaranteed one. Darius looked around for an outlet, any outlet, but the ones near him were already claimed by passengers guarding their chargers like lifelines. He could have asked someone to share. He didn't. He wasn't in the mood to explain anything. He ran a hand over his face, trying to think of a next step. Rebook? Too expensive. Borrow a phone? Maybe, but who do you call when you don't even know what words could fix the situation? Ask for a same-day interview online. Silver Hawk had made it painfully clear in person only. This wasn't just missing a flight, it was missing his chance. His stomach growled, loudly enough that the couple across from him glanced over. He ignored it. He'd already spent the last of his cash on tea, a muffin, and that inhaler the woman had needed. He wasn't complaining, he'd make the same choice again, but now the consequences sat on him like weight. He leaned back against the cold seat, staring at the ceiling's metal beams. The airport announcements kept rolling by, gate changes, boarding calls, cities he wasn't going to see today. Everything moved around him while he stayed stuck in place. Minutes passed, maybe longer. The morning crowds thinned, replaced by quieter travelers heading toward midday flights. At one point, he closed his eyes just to rest them, telling himself it was only for a moment. But fatigue had been waiting for this exact opening. The night before nerves, the early morning caretaking, the sprint across the terminal, the adrenaline of stepping in to protect a stranger, it all crashed into him at once. He drifted into sleep, not on purpose, but the kind of sleep that takes you because your body decides it's done negotiating. When he woke again, the light outside had changed, softer, more blue than gold. Late afternoon. He blinked, disoriented, before remembering exactly where he was and why his chest tightened the way it did. His flight was long gone. The interview window was closed. His shot, whatever it had been, was over. He straightened, rubbing the stiffness from his neck. The terminal around him had a different rhythm now. Fewer families, more solo travelers, suitcase wheels rolling like faint echoes across polished floors. A janitor pushed a cart nearby, humming to himself. Someone's ringtone played in the distance. The entire place felt like it had moved on without him. Darius sat there, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. He didn't cry, he didn't curse. That wasn't him. But a sinking heaviness settled into his chest, a quiet, painful weight that came from knowing he had tried, worked, hoped, and somehow still ended up right back in the same place he'd been fighting so hard to escape. He reached into his wallet, more out of habit than intention, and his fingers brushed against the folded slip of paper the woman had given him earlier. He'd nearly forgotten about it. He pulled it out, the paper soft from being handled. He unfolded it slowly, expecting something simple, maybe a polite thank you, maybe a note of apology, but instead, in small steady handwriting, it said, "Do not leave the airport, LW." He stared at it, once, twice, a third time. The letters didn't change. The message didn't make more sense. It felt cryptic, too deliberate to be random, too calm to be accidental. Why would she write this? How did she know he'd still be here? Why did she want him to stay? A flicker, small but undeniable, lit in his chest. Not hope exactly. More like the feeling you get when a locked door shifts just enough to make you think it might open after all. He folded the note again, slower this time, as if the act itself might tell him something. He didn't know what was coming. He only knew one thing. He was not leaving that airport. The airport had settled into that strange late afternoon lull, quiet, but not calm, when the automatic doors behind Darius hissed open, letting in a rush of warm desert air. He didn't look up at first. He was still turning the small folded note over in his hands, rereading the same 6 words like they might suddenly rearrange themselves into instructions that made sense. Do not leave the airport. It felt too intentional to ignore, too strange to explain, and the longer he held it, the more it pressed on his mind. Then a shadow crossed the floor in front of him, sharp, deliberate, stopping exactly where his boots rested. It wasn't the hesitant shuffle of a traveler looking for a seat. It wasn't a janitor or a gate agent. It was something more directed. Darius lifted his eyes. A man in a charcoal gray uniform stood before him. The kind of uniform you didn't see in commercial terminals. Crisp lines, polished shoes, a nameplate he couldn't read from this angle. The man held the posture of someone trained to stand still for long periods, someone used to waiting for the right moment to speak. "Mr. Coleman," the man asked. For a second, Darius wondered if he'd misheard. "Yeah?" The uniformed man nodded once. "Precise. Ma'am is ready for you." Darius blinked. "Ma'am, yes sir," the man said, stepping aside and gesturing toward the sliding doors. "She asked me to escort you." Escort. Not help, not guide. Escort. A word that didn't belong anywhere in Darius's world. He stood slowly, his muscles stiff from sitting so long. I think you've got the wrong guy, he said. Who exactly is he? Never finished the question. Because beyond the uniformed man just outside the doorway a black SUV idled at the curb, sleek, spotless, the kind of car that looked like it belonged to someone whose life was nothing like his. The rear passenger door opened with mechanical smoothness, like it had been well practiced, and a pair of polished heels touched the pavement first. Then she stepped out, and everything Darius thought he knew about this day snapped into a different shape. The woman from earlier, the frail, shaken, trembling figure he'd walked through the terminal, was gone. In her place was a presence. Lorraine Whitfield stood tall, dressed in a clean-cut navy blazer and silk blouse, her silver hair pinned into a flawless twist. Her shoulders were square, her expression calm, and her eyes carried the kind of sharpness that made you feel like she could see farther than anyone else in the room. It was her, but it wasn't. And the transformation hit Darius so hard he forgot how to speak for a moment. She gave him a warm, controlled smile, the kind that didn't waste energy but still reached her eyes. Mr. Coleman, she said, voice steady, confident, absolutely nothing like the fragile whisper from earlier. I told you not to leave. That sentence alone sent a rush of adrenaline through him, confusion mixing with something he couldn't name. He stepped closer, searching her face. Ma'am, you all right? I mean earlier I'm perfectly fine, she said, her tone almost apologetic but not weak. Earlier was another matter entirely. Before he could ask anything else she nodded toward the SUV. Come. We have much to discuss. He looked between her polished shoes, the luxury vehicle, the uniformed driver now holding the door open for him, then back at her. Nothing about this matched the woman he'd pulled away from scammers 3 hours ago. He tried again. Ma'am, I don't understand what's happening. She gave a soft laugh, like she'd expected that reaction. You will, she said. Then lifting her chin slightly she added, but first let me reintroduce myself. She extended her hand, not trembling this time, but confident, practiced. I'm Lorraine Whitfield, she said, CEO of North Star Aviation Group. The words hit Darius like a physical impact. Not because he knew her company well, but because even people who didn't work in aviation knew that name. North Star wasn't some airline. It was a global aviation powerhouse, private fleets, maintenance schools, pilot academies, aerospace contracts. The kind of company that turned cities into hubs and employees into lifers. He stared at her, speechless. I imagine this is unexpected, she said gently. He let out a stunned breath. That's one way to put it. She glanced toward the terminal, scanning the space instinctively, the way someone used to being recognized might check for cameras or attention. But no one was watching. No one in that busy airport seemed to realize a titan of the aviation industry was standing right there. Why were you out there alone? Darius asked, still struggling to piece it together. Why were you? Because, she interrupted quietly, sometimes the only way to understand a system is to experience it without anyone knowing who you are. She didn't elaborate, she didn't need to. Something in her eyes said this was bigger than a scammer incident. Something internal, serious, but private. He exhaled slowly, grounding himself. So what does that have to do with me? Lorraine's gaze softened. Everything, Mr. Coleman. Those men targeted me today, and no one else stopped. Not one person, except you. Despite your own priorities, despite the cost, you intervened with integrity, not anger, with calm, not ego. That is rare. She paused, then added with quiet conviction, and I value rare. The words sank in before he could fully process them. Then she nodded toward the open SUV door. Please, come with me. Darius hesitated only a second before curiosity and something deeper pushed him forward. He climbed into the SUV, settling into seats that felt like they belonged in another world entirely. As the door closed behind him with a soft click, he caught his reflection in the tinted window, tired eyes, worn shirt, calloused hands. A man who'd come to the airport, hoping for one opportunity, and somehow stepped directly into another he couldn't even begin to understand. Lorraine slid in beside him, adjusting her blazer with a grace that looked instinctive. Mr. Coleman, she said, as the SUV pulled away from the curb, your day is not over. And for the first time since dawn, Darius felt the ground shift beneath his feet, quietly, but unmistakably. His life was changing. He just didn't know how far it would go yet. The SUV glided across the airport's restricted access road like it belonged there, dipping past security checkpoints that didn't bother to stop them. Darius sat in the back seat with his backpack wedged awkwardly between his knees, trying to pretend he belonged in leather that soft and air conditioning that gentle. Lorraine didn't say much at first. She simply watched the tarmac through the tinted window, her fingers tapping lightly on the armrest, as if she were keeping time with her thoughts. Every few seconds, Darius glanced her way, still unsure whether he should sit at attention, relax, or brace for impact. Nothing about this felt real. One minute he was helping a stranger who couldn't lift her own purse. Now he was sitting next to the CEO of a global aviation powerhouse, being chauffeured through a part of the airport most people never knew existed. The SUV made a final turn, and suddenly the runway lights came into view, long lines of gold reflecting off the evening haze. But the thing that made Darius sit up straighter was the jet parked near a private gate, sleek white body, North Star's signature midnight blue stripe along the tail, engines so polished they glowed faintly under the setting sun. It wasn't big like commercial planes. It wasn't meant to be. It was the kind of aircraft CEOs used when they needed to move fast and quietly. The SUV slowed to a stop beside it. Darius blinked. We're getting on that. Lorraine offered him a gentle matter-of-fact smile. Yes, I had a flight scheduled for Seattle this evening. You need to go to Seattle. I'm simply adjusting my itinerary. He opened his mouth to argue, because this level of generosity, this level of access, this level of anything wasn't part of his world, but she raised a hand lightly. Before you protest, consider this. You helped me today without hesitation. Allow me to return the courtesy. He swallowed, unsure what to say. Unsure what the protocol was when a billionaire told you to stop arguing and get on her private jet. The driver opened the door for him. Darius stepped out, legs unsteady, not because he was afraid of flying, but because he was afraid of what this meant. Not the money, not the plane, but the shift like life had quietly turned a corner without asking for his permission. The jet stairs lowered with a quiet mechanical hum. A flight attendant in a North Star Navy uniform greeted them with the kind of polished professionalism you usually saw on commercials. Good evening, Miss Whitfield. Mr. Coleman, welcome aboard. Hearing his name so confidently spoken made Darius pause mid-step. He looked at the attendant, confused. You were expecting me. We received the passenger update 15 minutes ago, she said with a warm smile. Your seat is ready. 15 minutes. That meant Lorraine had added him to the manifest before the SUV even reached the tarmac. She'd planned for him to come. She'd planned for all of this. He stepped into the cabin, and for a moment, the world narrowed into pure disbelief. The interior looked like a living room in the sky, cream leather seats angled toward one another, soft amber lighting, wood paneling that gleamed. There were no rows, no cramped aisles, just open space and quiet luxury. He hovered awkwardly near the entrance until Lorraine gestured toward a seat across from hers. Sit, Mr. Coleman, please. He lowered himself into the chair, careful not to scuff anything. The seat hugged him back like it was designed to make him forget the world outside existed. As the jet doors sealed shut with a low thump and the engines began their soft rumble beneath them, Darius felt the reality of the moment settle into his bones. He was on a private jet, flying to the interview he'd thought he'd lost forever, with a woman whose identity had changed the entire trajectory of his day. When they leveled off in the sky, Lorraine finally turned fully toward him. Her posture shifted from CEO in motion to someone ready to have a real conversation. Mr. Coleman, she began.
I'd like to explain something to you.
He nodded cautiously. I was in Phoenix today for a reason, she said. Our company is preparing a major review of national airport safety protocols. We've been hearing about incidents of traveler scams at certain drop-off zones. I wanted to see for myself. Her expression tightened just slightly. Unfortunately, the rumors were true. Darius straightened. Ma'am, I didn't mean to interfere with your... You didn't interfere, she cut in gently. You intervened, and that's very different. For the first time her voice softened in a way that felt personal. I've watched people freeze when confronted with wrongdoing. They worry about the consequences. They look away. Today you did not. Despite having everything to lose, you chose to do the right thing. Darius shifted in his seat. Compliments rarely sat comfortably on him. I just didn't want someone getting hurt. And that, she said, leaning back slightly, is exactly why I sought you out. She opened a leather folder resting beside her. Inside were documents stamped with North Star's crest, blueprints, facility layouts, flight maintenance schematics, training curriculums. He recognized some of it instantly: aviation mechanic training modules, engine diagrams, apprentice progression charts. But one page stood out, a header that read, Aviation Mechanics Global Institute, Nairobi Expansion Project. Lorraine watched his reaction carefully. We are building training centers worldwide, she said. Not to replace seasoned technicians, but to create opportunities where they didn't exist. Places where young people can learn a trade that will change the course of their lives. She paused, then added, we need instructors, leaders, people who have walked through fire and come out with humility instead of bitterness. People who know what it feels like to start from nothing. Darius felt his breath hitch. And you think that's me? Lorraine didn't answer immediately. She folded her hands, studying him in a way that made him feel seen and evaluated at the same time. I think, she said slowly, that your character is rare, and rare is invaluable. The words hit somewhere deep, not flattering, not overwhelming, just honest enough to feel like truth. But let me be clear, she continued. I am not offering you a charity role. I'm offering you an opportunity, a position as senior technical instructor, a structured fast track into leadership if you excel. He stared at her, stunned, speechless. Your flight this morning may have closed one door, she said. But life doesn't work the way airline schedules do. Sometimes missed flights are simply rerouted paths. Darius looked out the jet window, watching the orange line of the sunset stretch across the horizon. He thought of Maya, thought of his mother, thought of all the times he'd wondered if his chance to be something more had already passed. He swallowed. It's a lot. It is, Lorraine agreed, and I don't expect an answer tonight. You still have an interview tomorrow, and you should go. She offered a small smile. A man deserves to choose his future, not stumble into it. The jet hummed around them, steady, confident, carrying him toward a city where he'd expected rejection, and now carried a second chance he couldn't have imagined that morning. Lorraine closed the folder and folded her hands neatly on top of it. When you're ready, Mr. Coleman, she said quietly, you'll know. And as the aircraft sliced through the sky toward Seattle, Darius realized something he had never allowed himself to believe. For the first time in years, his future wasn't slipping away, it was opening. Seattle hit him with a different kind of cold. Not the sharp desert chill Phoenix gets in winter, but a dampness that seeped into his clothes the second he stepped out of the jet. The sky was draped in a heavy gray blanket, the kind that made the entire city look like it was holding its breath. A car from North Star dropped him off at a modest downtown hotel. Nothing fancy, just a place to sleep and shave before facing the interview he'd thought he'd lost forever. Darius barely rested. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the day, the scammer incident, the closed gate, the exhaustion, the note, the SUV, the jet, Lorraine's offer, the folder of schematics. Every piece felt unreal, like scenes from two different movies spliced together. And somewhere between all of it, he had to decide which version of himself he wanted to show the next morning. When dawn broke, Seattle's skyline was still wrapped in fog. Darius dressed in the same pressed shirt he'd ironed the night before leaving Phoenix, smoothing it over and over despite the wrinkles that refused to disappear. It wasn't a new shirt, but it was the best he had. He checked his reflection, tired eyes, steady posture, jaw set with quiet determination. That was enough. It had to be. The Silver Hawk Automotive Building sat in the center of downtown, all mirrored glass and sharp corners, the kind of structure that wanted you to know it took itself seriously. Inside the lobby was a curated blend of modern minimalism, gray walls, chrome lines, a receptionist who looked like she had never once raised her voice above a polite indoor level. 15th floor, she told him with a practiced smile. Suite 1502. The elevator ride up felt too quiet, his reflection staring back at him in the mirrored walls. For a brief second, he wondered if he belonged here. He pushed that thought away. Doubt wouldn't help him now. When he stepped into the suite, a man in a fitted suit approached with a grin that looked rehearsed but professional. He extended a hand. Darius Coleman, Brent Hollis, Director of Technical Operations. Darius shook his hand firmly. "Morning, sir. Glad you made it," Brent said as he led him into a conference room. "We weren't sure after the flight delay notice." Darius stiffened. "You got that alert?" Brent shrugged casually. "Airlines notify recipients when candidates miss their scheduled flights. Fortunately for you, we didn't fill the slot yet." A small relief washed over him, but only for a moment, because the next line came quick, clipped, and without sympathy. "However, we value punctuality here. A missed flight isn't a great sign." Darius kept his face calm. "Understood. It won't happen again." Brent nodded once, accepting the answer but not impressed by it. He gestured for Darius to take a seat, then launched into the interview without ceremony. "What's your experience with third-gen hybrid engines? How quickly can you diagnose a failing control module without digital assistance? Describe your process for supervising apprentices in a high-output environment." Darius answered each question with the fluency of a man who'd lived under the hood of vehicles for 2 decades. He didn't embellish, he didn't oversell. He just spoke plainly, because everything he knew, he had learned the hard way, not from manuals but from busted knuckles and long nights fixing problems no one else wanted to touch. Brent nodded along, jotting notes, occasionally raising eyebrows in approval. It was going well, but then came the shift, small, subtle but sharp. "So," Brent said, leaning back in his chair, "if we move forward, you'd be working under our technical supervisor, Kyle Jennings. Just joined us last year. Bright kid, fresh masters from Michigan State." Darius didn't respond immediately. 25 years of experience under someone who was barely 30. Nothing wrong with education, nothing wrong with young leaders, but he recognized what this meant. The ceiling here wasn't going to move for him. It was already sealed shut. Brent moved on. "Hours are 6 to 4:30, Monday through Saturday. Overtime encouraged, sometimes required, depending on backlog." That hit him too, harder than he expected. 6 days a week, nearly 11-hour days, no mention of flexibility, no mention of family considerations. Then the number came. Starting salary, $59,000 annually. Benefits included, performance review at 18 months. $59,000. Not nothing, but not life-changing either. Not enough to give Maya the childhood she deserved. Not enough to give his mother reliable medical care. Not enough to undo the years that had already been hard on all of them. Brent closed his notebook. "We have one other candidate. He's waiting for an offer from another company, so if you want this job, I'd need your answer by 10 a.m. tomorrow. No later." There it was. The deadline. Cold, clean, corporate. Darius nodded once. "I'll give you my decision by then." "Good," Brent said, standing to shake his hand again. "We appreciate men with discipline." Darius walked out with the same steady pace he'd entered, but inside, something was quietly unraveling. The elevator descended slowly, each floor dinging like a reminder of the choice waiting for him. When he stepped back onto the street, the Seattle air felt heavier than before, cool mist coating the edge of his jacket, lights reflecting off wet concrete like a city caught between day and night. He looked up at the glass tower he'd just walked out of. It wasn't a bad job, it wasn't a trap, it wasn't unfair, it was safe, a straight line, a predictable path, and once upon a time, that would have been enough. But now, all he could think about was the way Lorraine had watched him on the jet, not with doubt, not with scrutiny, but with a kind of recognition he hadn't felt in years, like she saw something he'd forgotten was still inside him. His phone buzzed, a hotel text alert reminding him he had a dinner reservation, confirmed courtesy of Miss Whitfield. He exhaled slowly. 2 roads, one familiar, one terrifying, and somehow he knew tonight's dinner wasn't just a meal, it was the crossroads. The restaurant, perched on the top floor of the Elliott Bay Tower, looked more like a scene from a movie than a place real people actually dined. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Seattle skyline, a mosaic of city lights flickering against the wash of evening fog. Inside, the lighting was warm, soft, almost intimate, like the world had decided to quiet down just long enough for something important to happen. Darius stepped out of the elevator, tugging gently at the collar of his pressed shirt. He felt underdressed the moment the maître d' greeted him. The diners wore tailored suits and designer dresses. He wore the best clothes he had that still reminded him where he came from. But before the awkwardness could settle in, he saw her. Lorraine Whitfield stood by the window, hands clasped loosely in front of her, posture straight, gaze fixed on the glowing city below. She didn't look restless, or anxious, or impatient. She looked ready, as if she'd been preparing for this conversation all day. She turned the moment she sensed him walking toward her. "Mr. Coleman," she said with a warm, genuine smile, "you look exhausted, and like you handled the interview with more grace than most would after the day you had." Darius let out a breath that was half a laugh. "I'm not sure about grace. I survived it though." "Well," she replied, motioning for him to join her at the table, "survival is a skill too." They sat across from each other, a candle flickering between them. A server poured water, set down 2 menus, then disappeared with the quiet precision of someone trained to vanish at the right moments. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city did the talking, the soft hum of distant traffic, the muted glow of ferries moving across the bay, the quiet thunk of someone dropping a fork 3 tables over. Then Lorraine folded her hands and looked at him with an expression that blended kindness with business-like clarity. "Tell me about your interview." Darius inhaled slowly, choosing his words. "It went fine. Brent, the director, he seems fair. Knows his stuff. The company's solid. But," she asked gently, "but," he hesitated, "it's a ceiling. A stable one, but it's there." Lorraine nodded as if she expected that answer. "And stability is not something to dismiss," she said. "But settling is." She didn't say it harshly, she said it like someone who knew exactly what settling cost over time. Darius shifted in his chair. "The hours are long. The pay's okay but not enough to fix what needs fixing back home, and I'd be working under someone half my age." He took a sip of water, the glass trembling slightly in his hand. "It's honest work, it would keep the lights on." "But," she asked again. He stared at the tablecloth for a long moment. "But it wouldn't change anything." Lorraine leaned back, studying him, not judging, not pressuring, just listening. After a while she opened the folder she'd brought with her, sliding it across the table toward him. The same folder from the jet, the same emblem embossed on the top. "The future in paper form. I want to show you exactly what we're building," she said. Darius hesitated, then opened it. Inside were updated schematics of the Nairobi expansion, training hangars, dormitories, classroom layouts, photos of the community the center would serve, faces of young people with bright eyes and calloused hands, the kind of kids who had potential but no path, kids who reminded him of himself at 19. Lorraine continued, her voice softer now. "My husband was a pilot," she said. 34 years with the company. He died in a maintenance accident overseas, one that could have been prevented if the local crews had been trained properly. Darius looked up, startled. She rarely spoke of personal matters. She went on. "That loss shaped every decision I've made since. I don't build training centers for profit, Mr. Coleman. I build them so that someone else's loved one comes home." The words landed heavy, not manipulative, not dramatic, just honest and heavy in the way truth tends to be. Darius didn't know what to say, so she continued. "And I've learned something in all these years at the helm of a company larger than most cities. Talent matters. But character," she tapped the folder. "Character is non-negotiable." She let that sink in before adding, "You didn't know who I was this morning. You didn't help because you thought it would get you somewhere. You helped because that is who you are. That is why I need you." The next moment was quiet, heavy, fragile, important. The kind of moment you remember years later. Darius exhaled. "If I take this, I'd be moving my daughter to Kenya, leaving everything familiar, starting over." Lorraine nodded, and walking toward something extraordinary. He blinked, emotion tightening his throat. Extraordinary. No one had used a word like that in connection with his life in a long time, maybe ever. He flipped through the pages again. Pictures, plans, futures, lives about to be shaped. Then he thought about Maya, the way she'd hugged him that morning, the drawing in his wallet. "Daddy, this is your big day." He pressed a hand lightly to his pocket just to feel the outline of the paper still inside. His daughter's belief in him had always been bigger than his own. Lorraine watched him quietly, seeing the shift happening inside him. She didn't push, she didn't sweeten the offer, she just waited. Finally she slid a slim pen across the table. "You don't have to decide tonight," she said. "But if you do, we start your training next week." Darius picked up the pen, turned it once between his fingers, then again. His heartbeat wasn't frantic or scared anymore. It was steady. He signed, not with flourish, not with hesitation, just with certainty. When he looked up, Lorraine smiled, not triumphant, not relieved, just deeply approving. "Good," she said softly. "You chose the harder road, the right road." Darius leaned back, the weight in his chest lighter than it had felt in years. The skyline outside was still foggy, but for him the path forward had never been clearer. The Kenyan sun wasn't shy about showing up. It stretched across the tarmac in long amber beams, warming the metal roofs and newly painted hangars of the Nairobi Aviation Training Center, the crown jewel of North Star's mechanics initiative. The air carried a mix of jet fuel, dust and possibility, an unexpected blend that Darius Coleman had grown so used to he almost forgot it once felt foreign. He stood on the observation deck overlooking the facility, hands on his hips, North Star badge clipped to his dark blue instructor uniform, the rising sun emblem stitched right above his heart. A year and a half had passed, yet some mornings still hit him the same way, like he'd woken up in a life borrowed from a better man. Below him, two apprentices, local kids, both barely 20, worked carefully through a hydraulic systems drill. Their movements were slow but confident, speaking to hours spent watching, repeating, failing, fixing, learning. Darius watched closely, nodding with quiet pride. They were good, damn good. And the proud crackle in his chest wasn't just from the progress, it was from knowing he had helped shape it. A voice behind him called out, "Chief Darius, we need your eyes over here." He turned to see one of the trainees waving him over, smiling wide with a kind of excitement he remembered from his own early days. "Coming," he called back, raising a hand. But before he could step away, a black SUV rolled through the front gate, gliding across the dirt road like it had decided it belonged on every terrain. The vehicle didn't need a nameplate. Everyone here knew exactly who rode in it. Lorraine Whitfield. Even now, after all these months, her presence still nudged the energy of the compound upward. She stepped out, moving slower than she used to, but still with that unmistakable command behind her posture. Her linen blazer fluttered slightly in the warm breeze, and her sunglasses caught the sun just enough to flash like a quiet announcement. "The boss is here." Darius made his way down the stairs as she approached. When they reached each other, he extended a hand with a grin he didn't bother trying to hide. "Miss Whitfield, welcome back." She took his hand, holding it a second longer than needed. "You look like you belong here," she said, eyes scanning him, taking in the uniform, the sun-touched skin, the confidence. "I knew you would. I feel like I do," he admitted. Most days. They walked together toward the main hangar, passing trainees who nodded respectfully, some whispering, some trying and failing to hide their excitement. To them, Lorraine wasn't just a CEO, they'd grown up hearing her name on aviation news, seeing her face in articles about global training initiatives. And to them, Darius wasn't just an instructor, he was the man who didn't give up on them, who stayed after hours, who talked to them like they mattered. Inside the hangar, Lorraine paused, taking in the organized chaos. Apprentice teams hovered around engine models, a trio studied a faulty pressure valve, someone clanged a wrench against a toolbox. It looked like any good mechanic shop, loud, purposeful, alive. She whispered, "They know who you are." Darius gave a modest shrug. "They know I show up. That's enough." "No," she corrected softly, "you are the reason they show up." The words hit him more deeply than he expected. As they walked, she glanced around with a kind of maternal pride, stopping occasionally to greet trainees or inspect progress. She moved slower these days, but her presence was sharp as ever, like a lighthouse that didn't need to shout to guide ships. Eventually they stepped outside again, where the sun had shifted toward late afternoon, casting long shadows across the dirt. Lorraine turned to him, her expression shifting from admiration to business. So she said lightly, "São Paulo is next." He raised an eyebrow. "Already?" She nodded. "Construction begins in 5 months. We'll need a lead instructor, someone who can build the foundation the way you built this one." Darius took a breath, feeling that familiar mix of intimidation and excitement. "You're offering me the job. I'm offering you the choice," she corrected with a small smile. He looked around the compound, at the trainees tightening bolts with careful hands, at the instructors who now relied on him, at the horizon that had become his home. He thought about his daughter Maya, now living in Nairobi with him, speaking Swahili phrases at the breakfast table, asking questions about airplanes like she'd been born with aviation in her blood. He thought of his mother, whose health had improved since North Star provided insurance that actually covered her needs. He thought of everything this place had given him that Seattle never could have. Then his gaze drifted back to Lorraine. "You know," he said, 18 months ago, I fell asleep on a metal airport bench thinking my life had hit a dead end." She smiled softly, knowingly. "And now?" she asked. He looked out across the airfield again, at the red dirt, the bright sun, the young mechanics who already looked up to him, as if he'd been here 10 years instead of 1. A soft breeze carried the distant hum of aircraft engines, a sound he'd once only admired but now felt connected to. "Now," he said, "I feel like I'm just getting started." Lorraine chuckled, rolling her shoulders slightly. "That's what I hoped you'd say." She turned back toward the SUV. Before climbing in, she pushed her sunglasses up and looked at him one last time. "And Darius?" "Yes, ma'am, thank you," she said quietly, "for carrying my bags that day." He smiled. "No words needed." She stepped into the SUV, the door closing with that same smooth, quiet thud he remembered from Phoenix. As the vehicle pulled away, dust rising behind it, Darius stood still for a moment, letting the quiet settle around him. The plaque beside the main building shimmered under the sun. Aviation Mechanics Global Institute. Nairobi behind him, 30 new futures were unfolding, wrenches in hand, hope in their eyes. Ahead of him, another path waited. São Paulo, a new center, a new beginning. He didn't know which road he'd choose yet, but he wasn't afraid of choosing anymore. Because sometimes the flight you miss is just the runway you needed. In the quiet heat of the Kenyan afternoon, while the SUV carrying Lorraine disappeared into a cloud of red dust, Darius remained exactly where he stood, feet planted, hands on his hips, shoulders lifted just slightly the way they do when a man realizes he has finally stepped into a life that fits. He watched the students move around the field, calling out to each other, laughing, arguing about torque measurements and safety checks, their voices weaving into a rhythm that had become the soundtrack of his days. He thought back to Phoenix, the scammers, the stumble, the tremble in that woman's hands, the split-second decision to stop, the boarded gate, the closed flight, the empty battery, the quiet bench. It all felt like a different lifetime, and yet without any of it, he wouldn't be here. That's the kind of twist life never warns you about. You think you're watching a door slam shut, when really it's the sound of another one unlocking. Darius glanced toward the office window where the framed note hung above his desk, the same slip of paper that once felt like a riddle: "Do not leave the airport." Back then it had confused him. Now it grounded him, because that message wasn't about airports at all. It was about life. Sometimes, the place you think you're stuck in is exactly where your blessing is coming to find you. He let the warm wind brush over his face as a pair of young trainees jogged past him, chasing each other with joking insults about who had stripped a bolt last week. He laughed under his breath. This place, this dusty sunlit workshop in the heart of East Africa, had taken every version of him and opened it wider. As an instructor, as a leader, as a father, he reached into his pocket, feeling the edges of Maya's drawing, now folded carefully like something sacred. In the picture, the airplane was too big, the people stick thin, the sun bright yellow, but she'd drawn him smiling. And that, for the longest time, had been the hardest part to believe. Now, he smiled without thinking. The center hummed behind him, engines testing, tools clanking, futures forming. It was messy and loud and alive, and he belonged to it, completely. He took one last look at the horizon, wide, warm possible, and headed back toward the hangar, ready to teach the next lesson, ready to shape the next pair of hands, ready for whatever road came next. Because sometimes a missed flight isn't a failure, it's a reroute, a recalibration, a new runway you never expected, and sometimes the smallest choices, a pause, a "Hey ma'am, are you okay?" a step toward instead of away, become the turning points that shift everything. If this story moved you even a little, don't let it end here. Hit that like button so YouTube knows you want more stories like this. Subscribe if you believe kindness still has a place in this world. and turn on the notification bell because tomorrow we're dropping another story that just might change the way you look at your day. Until then, be the person who stops. You never know who's watching or what runway you're about to land on next.